On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to look at the judgment of God. Gary Stimman is here to discuss, is God judging the world today?
And by the way, this is a current, pertinent question, JR, because a lot of people are asking it, not just Christians, but New Agers. New Agers who speak to the divine avatars. You know, they have their transmediums and they speak with the great intelligences from beyond, and they tell us that the great intelligences are upset because man has plundered planet Earth. They refer to planet Earth as Gaia, or the Earth Mother, or Mother Earth. And they say that because we've plundered Mother Earth, she's getting upset. She's shaking, she's quaking, the winds are blowing, the volcanoes, the earthquakes, and finally, hurricanes. And so New Agers are saying the Earth is being judged. News sources, the big television networks, constantly run stories about why are all these terrible catastrophes befalling the United States? And by the way, do you know that there's a big earthquake poised to strike Los Angeles? Millions will be killed. And so they'll do 15 minutes on the evening news of what would happen if we were struck by an earthquake. And always, JR, the overtone is something is behind all this. We've done something wrong and we're being judged.
It seems like they always say it's not if, but when.
They do,
you know?
Yeah, that's right.
Now, we must go to the tried and tested, the historically proven passage of Matthew 24. When Jesus said there would be wars, rumors of wars, that there would be false messiahs, there would be pestilence, diseases, earthquakes in various places. And let's take a look at that on today's program, Gary, and see if we can put a face on what's happening today.
Yeah, and a lot of people, JR, and people who have rarely, if ever, read the Bible will know about what Jesus said in Matthew 24. He said in verse 6, "You shall hear of wars, rumors of wars." In verse 7, he said, "For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in divers places." Even people who haven't the slightest knowledge of the Bible, or maybe just a smattering of knowledge, will quote this. And they will always loosely associate it with God's judgment, an angry God judging man for misbehaving, shall we say.
Well, now, the question Jesus was answering was, what will happen at the end of the age, or end of the world, as the King James Bible puts it. It's the end of the age. In other words, there is an end to world history. It will not just continue on and on and on. And by the way, if it did continue on and on and on, in another 250 years, there'll be over 400 billion people in this world, which is absolutely ludicrous. There would not be enough air to breathe, not enough water to drink, not enough food to eat, to sustain anywhere near that kind of population. So the world is moving toward terrible times, whether or not God has a hand in it. If God has a hand in it, then there's hope. If not, there is no hope for the human race, Gary.
Absolutely not. Now, before we go into the details of what's been called the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, we need to mention two things. First, when Jesus spoke while he was on earth, he spoke with utter authority. He spoke with the authority of one who had created the world. He brought love, he brought intelligence. His character is almost beyond belief when you read about the details of his life. But JR, even the temple authorities, when they listened to him, said, and by the way, they said this in John 7:46, "Never man spake like this man." When Jesus spoke, he didn't grope for words. He spoke absolutely. He spoke of past, present, and future as if they were all one entity. He spoke with utter authority. And then in John 5:22, we read this sentence, which really goes to the heart of the question, is God judging the world today? It says, "For the Father judgeth no man, but hath committed all judgment unto the Son." And I think that people in the world don't quite get that distinction. In other words, when they think of God's judgment, they think of this angry God in the heavens, this ancient white bearded figure up there with his staff in his hand, and he's going to act out of anger to judge mankind.
Throwing lightning bolts.
Lightning bolts and everything. But that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says that the Son is the judge. And J.R., that puts an entirely different cast on things.
You know, when Jesus said in the end time there would be these wars, rumors of wars and so on, in one place he said it'll be so bad nothing has ever like it has ever happened in history. Well now, Gary, in order to make a statement like that, he has to know all about the past and all about the future. He was not some uneducated itinerant preacher from Nazareth. He was the one who knew it all. And when he said, in the end time, there's going to be these upheavals, they will come to pass. And when he says nothing like it has ever happened in history, then he knows that nothing like it has ever happened in history.
And that puts it very, very bluntly. Jesus was the inventor of particle physics. Jesus understands radar. He understands computers. He's probably at least 2,700 generations beyond computers as we know them today. Jesus spoke with the absolute authority of the most brilliant person that you can possibly imagine, and then you'd still fall short. Well, he's sitting, J.R., on the Mount of Olives with the disciples, and they say to him, "Look, Jesus, look across the valley here. Do you see all these beautiful, this eighth wonder of the world, the temple and the palaces and the fortresses? Isn't this gorgeous?" And Jesus said, "I say unto you, there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." That must have come as an extraordinary shock to them. And they responded by saying, "Well, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" Now in the Greek, that word world is age, translated from cosmos. And in general terms, it refers to the Gentile world system of power. At that time, of course, it was under Rome, and the Herodians, the Pharisees, were simply subservient to the Roman Empire. And later, of course, in 70 AD, the Romans came in and overthrew the whole thing. But without naming it as such, what the disciples were really asking is, when will you come back and end the age? Well, J.R., that was roughly 1975 years ago.
Yes.
And the age continues.
Now, when Jesus mentioned the times of the Gentiles in Luke 21:24, he was referring to Daniel's prophecy.
Yes, he was.
If we go back to chapter 7 of Daniel and we see the times of the Gentiles, and we go back to chapter 2 to see Nebuchadnezzar's monster man, then we must remember that a stone cut out without hand is going to destroy the whole thing. That in chapter 7, a little horn rises up and speaks great words against the Most High and wears out the saints of the Most High for 3.5 years. So Jesus here, when he speaks of the times of the Gentiles and when the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled, and he's referring to the future judgment.
Absolutely, and it's very, very important to remember that Jesus is the judge. Think about that every time you question God's judgment. Well, Jesus answered the disciples' questions in 5 ways. First, he said there are going to be many deceivers with all kinds of false messages, and of course it's been that way. The history of the church is littered with false cults, religious blind alleys. Secondly, he said there's not going to be just war, but there will be continuous talk of war, as he called rumors of wars. Thirdly, he predicted famines. Fourthly, he predicted pestilences, which we call disease today. Of course, we speak of epidemics, the swine flu. Today, it's the avian flu coming out of Southeast Asia. Sexually transmitted diseases would fall into this category. Fifthly, and finally, he warned of earthquakes. Not just earthquakes, but earthquakes in diverse places or in several different places, indicating a general instability of the Earth's tectonic plates. And J.R., the Earth is rumbling today, and a lot of people have called attention to that fact.
But you know, he talks about the future 7-year tribulation period, and it's going to be so bad that nothing like it has ever happened, not even yet. And we'll get to that when we come back in just a moment. Of the 5 judgments Jesus said would come in the end time, 3 of them are mostly man-made. The false prophets, wars, and then famine. Most of the famines are actually politically motivated. But the other 2, Gary, the other 2 are God things.
They are. The pestilences and earthquakes. And without a doubt, God destroys through disease. There are many Old Testament examples of pestilences that have been laid down upon particularly the tribes that attacked Israel, and upon Israel when Israel sinned. And those are divine judgments. Now, J.R., the interesting thing that Jesus got to, and I think it's overlooked by a lot of people who examine his teachings, he says concerning these 5 things, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Well, in the Greek, sorrows is odin, which means birth pangs, or the pains, labor pains of birth. And J.R., he is speaking specifically of the labor pains of Israel's birth, and in so doing, he's hearkening back to a lot of Old Testament prophecy. So
all of the judgments that will come, and maybe even are coming in this past century, as we've seen World War I and World War II, we've seen the persecution of the Jews, the birth of Israel, all of these revolve around the Jews. You cannot divorce judgment in general from the chosen people.
That's right. Everything centers around Israel, and particularly judgment. For example, in Isaiah 66, Isaiah uses this idea of labor pains. Isaiah 66:7 says, before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child.
Now that's an incredible statement, Gary.
It is.
This is something that most theologians have missed. So let's scrutinize this and find out why and how Israel had a man-child, gave birth to a man-child, before the travail came. And then comes the travail.
And Isaiah just uses word, he says, who has heard such a thing? He couches this in phraseology like, this is unbelievable. How can you give birth before labor pains? Well, he begins to talk about, first of all, he talks about the delivery of a man-child. Then, in verse 9, he says, shall I bring to birth and not cause to bring forth, saith the Lord, shall I cause to bring forth and shut the womb? Rejoice with Jerusalem, be glad with her, all ye that love her. And just before that, in verse 8, I guess it is, who hath heard such a thing? Who hath seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day, or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. So, J.R., he's making a difference here between the birth of the man-child, the Messiah.
Yeah, that was 2,000 years ago.
2,000 years ago, and the birth of Zion, which is national Israel. You can't call it any other thing. And of course, if there's something that's hated today, it's Zionism.
That's 1948.
Yes. Now, J.R., in this, we have Isaiah's prophecy where he talks about, shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day. That day may well be May 14th, 1948, and yet that was not the final end, but rather a beginning, if you will.
The Messianic age is not here yet, so we still have more birth pangs to go.
The birth pangs are going.
Or some kind of judgments. We've got the birth of the baby in 1948, and we had the birth of the Messiah 2,000 years ago. But that's differentiated here from one verse to the next, from verse 7 to verse 8.
It is.
Now we're talking about the birth of the nation, but we still have birth pangs after the birth.
Indeed. And that birth pang may be the whole process of birth. JR, when you actually have labor pains, you have the baby delivered, and then oftentimes they work with this baby and get it breathing. If you will, it inhales, you know, and starts to cry. And the inspiration process, inhalation, exhalation, could be likened to spiritual birth at that point, if you know what I mean, the breath coming in.
So the baby was born in 1948, but God needs to spank the baby, right? Get it to breathe.
Get it to breathe.
Put the spirit in it, so to speak.
Absolutely. And so we have this figure used not only by Isaiah, but in Revelation 12, 5 and 6, we read, and she brought forth a man-child who was to rule the nations. Well, that's Jesus. And then in the 6th verse, the woman flees into the wilderness. And there, for 1,260 days, she experiences great travail. She's not yet at that time, that is, Israel has not yet at that time been fully birthed into the kingdom.
Amazing. So we have the judgments of this past century. We had, for example, we had the flu epidemic in 1918, following the war, World War I. Then we had World War II, and on the heels of World War II in 1945, there was a worldwide shortage of food. That famine, of course, was politically motivated. But in 1973, with the explosion of Earth's population, U.S. News and World Report said we've entered a new era, the era of famine. So at this point, from then till now, the famines of this world have been more than just politically motivated. They are as a result of the sheer explosion of population.
You know, that plus politics. Now, Jeremiah picked up the same theme, JR, and he asks this question, Jeremiah chapter 30. He says, "Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins, as a woman in travail?" Jeremiah presents this amazing picture of birth. And then he says, concerning this, alas, for that day is great, there's none like it, is even the time of Jacob's trouble. And what he's doing is what the other prophets are doing. They liken the day of the Lord, the time of Jacob's trouble, the birth pangs, and the judgment of God as being parts of the same phenomenon, which is the judgment of God. And the purpose of that judgment, JR, is to bring Israel home. Number one, his aim is to overturn the wicked Gentile powers. Number two, to create a worldwide revival through the Jews, 144,000 when they're sealed. And number three, he's going to turn Israel's heart back to the Lord.
Amazing. So, the judgments that we are seeing, or that is the disasters that we are seeing, are indeed heaven sent. I don't think anyone within his right mind would disagree, whether it be a Kabbalistic Jew, such as Rabbi Kaduri, that you have in your article here, or whether it be an Islamic cleric,
right,
or whether it be simply a politician or a New Ager who says that Mother Earth is getting angry. It appears that these judgments are not normal. They are increasing, and Gary, they're going to continue to increase.
They are. They are birth pangs. But JR, the main birth pangs, as Jesus said, he kept telling the disciples, the end is not yet. These are just the beginning of sorrows. In other words, this process of birthing Israel into the kingdom will take a while. And the interesting thing, JR, is that Jews, the elders of Israel right now, are absolutely claiming that the disasters that struck America are directly the result of our support of the disengagement of the Jews from Gaza. And furthermore, they quote many similarities between the things that happened to Israel as judgment and the things that happened in Louisiana and Texas as judgment. All I can say is, JR, we're still a blessed land. We've had hundreds, thousands dying, but compare that to the godless nations. Russia, 30 million plus. China, one earthquake, JR, in China in 1976 killed 800,000 people. These countries that are Marxist, Leninist, godless, atheists, they get judged. God's divine retribution is clear to see. And on that basis alone, I just want to be quick to say, we're still a blessed land.
But you know, Gary, even though God is judging today, we still have an opportunity to be saved.
Yes.
We'll be back in just a moment. Over the past century or so, we have seen some disasters that we consider to be heaven-sent judgments in fulfillment of the prophecies. But Gary, Jesus is not actually acting as judge today and won't until the tribulation period.
That's correct, J.R. He is the judge, and there will be a judgment day. But as you've seen, it's connected with the birth of Israel. And J.R., he's not acting as divine judge today, but rather as our great high priest. And this is a wonderful word for all of you who fear judgment.
So you can come to Jesus and ask his forgiveness. You can say, I know I'm a sinner and I'm sorry. Please forgive me and save me. And he will. You can escape that day of judgment. I hope you'll trust him today. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on audio tape, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.